So there is lots of buzz around employee experience right now, but sadly, I think that sometimes the shift from HR to employee experience is not much more than just changing the label. Um, However, there are some HR teams out there who are really doing things differently and using employee experience to act as a kind of game changer for HR, to really drive change and do things in a very different way. And today I'm going to be talking to somebody from one of those teams. And so I am really delighted to welcome Katherine O'Callaghan, who is Head of People Transformation at NatWest. Hello, Katherine.
Hello, thank you very much for having me, Lucy.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. Now, I do like to before I dive into talking about the amazing stuff you've been doing with NatWest, with you and your team, I want to find out a little bit about you and your journey. So how did you get into this? How did you get into HR? And how did you find yourself doing this transformation role at NatWest? Perhaps tell us a little bit about that.
So I have worked in HR all of my career, and indeed I joined NatWest as was 20 something years ago on their graduate training programme into the HR scheme. And I have been fortunate enough to work in so many different types of HR jobs, whether that's HR consultants involved in acquisitions or business partner jobs, head of HR jobs, partnering businesses and thinking about the business strategy and how HR contributes to it. I've done specialist roles. But the jobs that I've enjoyed the most have been about transformation, whether that's transforming a business or that's been transforming ourselves.
Yeah.
And I had been involved in a programme previously to transform part of the HR function. So when an opportunity came up again to lead the transformation of the function, I really jumped at that chance.
And it's hard, isn't it? I think that HR for HR is one of the toughest roles in the HR profession. It's that kind of physician heal thyself, isn't it? You know, we're perhaps very good at telling people how they need to be doing it differently, possibly less good at taking that criticism for ourselves. And we're going to no doubt find out about some of the wins and challenges that you've had. But talk to me about what exactly it is that you've been doing, because it's quite broad, isn't it? It's not just a small little initiative. It's actually impacted the whole of the HR team, hasn't it?
Yes, no, it has. We have just over 1,000, 1,400 colleagues in our people function, and what we have done is impacted all of those. So our entire function now, 60% of that is aligned around a colleague goal and journey model.
So what prompted thinking that you needed to do HR differently, and what led you to the model that you've got today?
Well, our hypothesis has been that in order to attract and retain the skills and capabilities that we need for the future for our business strategy, that we needed to provide as good a colleague experience that all of us experience on a day-to-day basis as customers of other organisations. We needed it to feel like 2024 inside the organisation, not maybe 2014 as it might feel. So we knew that that was becoming a non-negotiable in the war for talent. So and what we did was our customer facing businesses had already adopted a goal and journey model where they take data on customer behaviour, what they like, what they dislike about their experiences, and they pull in specialists and they look at how they can transform that experience. And we had that example of it working from a customer perspective. So we thought, well, why wouldn't it also work with colleagues? It's still humans, it's still seeing people, and we could see lots of benefits from applying sort of human-centered design thinking, to applying agile ways of working, to be able to flex to emerging priorities. So all of those things sort of came together, and we realised that one of the things that we needed to do to transform was to move to a colleague goal and journey model.
I think it's really exciting because, you know, we see so often that what we're trying to do with our customers is change how they feel, change the experience, improve the experience. We're trying to retain their custom. We're trying to increase brand loyalty. And in many ways, they're exactly the same things that we're trying to do with our own people. And yet somehow it's easier to articulate and do with our customers than it is for our own employees. So it's fascinating that your inspiration came from the customer journey, from the NatWest Bank customers, and you've applied that to your people. And you call it the colleague goals and journeys. So can you just, for the benefit of listeners and a bit for me, just explain what that actually means in practice?
Sure. So we debated, there was many different ways we could cut each of the goals at a top level, but broadly we've gone with ones that are aligned to an employee life cycle. So from joining the bank right through to leaving the bank is broadly how we've cut the goals up. And within each goal, we've then looked at what are the various journeys that a colleague would go through, or what are the various experiences. And so we have got what we call our goal and journey taxonomy, which is our picture of what all of those experiences are, how they're cut up into each of our journeys. And so each goal lead will have a couple of journey managers who are responsible for those experiences. They really run those experiences end to end. So they're responsible for thinking about what that experience, what those experiences are, what the services we provide. They deliver the operational service to deliver those, but they also think about what do we need to do to make them better? What are our colleagues telling us? What's working, what's not? And so they're really responsible for sort of running that experience as well as changing it. And so really
a goal or a journey would be something like joining the bank, and it would be everything to do with you being hired, signing the paperwork, doing your onboarding. Would that be a kind of classic goal and journey that you'd be looking at?
Yeah. So definitely, and it would, so in that instance of joining the bank, it would be even before potential colleagues start the bank. It would be at the point where you've got candidates applying. So it is responsible, and clearly in sort of more traditional HR functions, you can draw parallels for some of the goals with things like if you've had recruitment, or there's quite common things that you can draw parallels with, or learning and development. But it's really looking at it from an experience lens. So that for some places there was a really obvious alignment with what we had previously, and in other situations we were creating teams from scratch because we'd never really thought about a chunk of the experience in that way. So it's taken it
Could you give me an example of one of those where perhaps the normal boundaries that would be, as you say, in the usual HR structure of the talent acquisition or hiring team, or the performance team, or the business generalists, could you give me an example of where you almost had to create a team from scratch?
Well, the one that we've done the most on is onboarding. So whilst onboarding is it's a well-known activity and every organisation has to do it, we hire thousands of colleagues a year. We didn't have one single person having responsibility for what's the onboarding experience like, what's working, what's not. And that's not just a people experience, that's, that covers technology when you're thinking about colleagues starting and giving them access to new systems. It's about access to property. It's quite an end-to-end experience. So the creation of someone that had that responsibility for looking at onboard end to end was brand new for us. And so that's a new area that we're looking at through fresh pair of eyes, and lots of opportunities there.
And I think you're absolutely right. For me, onboarding is one of the most neglected areas of the employee life cycle. And when you think about the impact that it has on you, those moments that matter, your experience of joining an organization, those first few days, weeks and months are so vitally important. And yet we often kind of give it to somebody, or just get on with it. There's your manual, there's your paperwork. We don't tend to think about how are they feeling through this. It's more things we've got to get them to do. So the onboarding experience, somebody who's responsible for that goal and that journey is thinking about from before they even start through to when they are actually kind of have gone through the whole onboarding experience. And as you say, linking up with technology and workplace and line managers and really thinking about how that person is going to feel and get off to the best possible start.
You make a really good point there. It's not just about the colleague that's joining. It's actually looking at this through the lens of personas. So it's the new person that's joining, but it's also thinking about the role the manager plays in that and what
Yeah.
support and what's the experience for them. And often they carry the burden of not knowing what they should be doing, and they can see how their new joiners not got the kit that they need to do their job, or so it's also thinking about the experience the manager has and how can we make that easier. So it's looking at the sort of the two personas in that instance has really helped us, redefine what's important.
Fascinating. Continuing with this kind of goals and journeys concept, and you mentioned that around 60% of the HR team are now aligned to these various goals and journeys. How has that gone down? I mean, you mentioned in some cases it's changed people's jobs quite considerably, but it also must bring with it a different mindset that they need to bring with them. Has it gone down well?
So, I mean, in general, people were really excited. I think clearly before you get to the point of making structural change, people know it's coming and there's a level of nervousness. But after we were able to talk about what this actually meant, we were able to align people to opportunities. Generally, people have really been responsive to it. They've been really excited. Some of the teams had already started dabbling in agile ways of working or thinking about things differently. And some, there was really sort of untapped pockets of potential in some teams. Um, Generally, people have responded really well. However, this is ultimately now a cultural change, and this is going to take time.
Mhm.
So a lot of what we focused on this year has been about investing in training. We've had people that have been out coaching the journey teams to talk to them about design thinking, showing them how to map out and do sort of service blueprinting and look at your data, and sort of training them in agile ways of working or thinking. But it's culture change, so this is
Yeah.
hard and it takes time. And some people have taken to it and they're flying, and it was like this was
Yeah.
always meant to be. Other people are coming at it that they're still sort of coming at it from a frame of being an HR subject matter expertise. They might have been a part of a centre of expertise previously.
Yeah.
They're used to thinking about things more in a product way rather than it being colleague centred. So this is a big shift. And we didn't want it to feel about it as loss of a profession, because this is not. This is just about evolving how we can be even better HR professionals.
Yeah,
So I
I think
think
I
it's
think
going to
that's
take time.
really interesting. Yeah, that kind of the danger or the challenge that some people might feel if they've been wedded to doing a certain area of expertise in a particular way, and suddenly they're being challenged on that by people that they might think, well, what do they know about it? And of course what you're saying is it's coming, the data and insight is coming from employees and managers themselves.
Yeah, and I think many HR teams face the problem of HR teams producing lots of great stuff that managers and colleagues never have a time to actually look at or read, and it can
Yeah.
be all really good stuff. And I think the challenge a lot of us have got is clearing out that stuff so that you
Yeah.
get cut through on the things that make the most difference and that colleague and managers really need. And I think the way you do that is by starting with the data. So
Yeah.
what are they telling you? And you focus on solving those problems. So that's a
And
real shift.
how do you get to that data? What is it? Colleague voice type forums, or is it pulse survey data, or is it a combination of a variety of sources?
In our discovery phase, there's lots of sources of data that we'll go out and do. So we'll have an annual, twice annual opinion survey. We have pulse surveys that run out across the bank. We'll sometimes ask specific questions. So we touched on onboarding. So one of the things we would have done in the discovery phase is we will have highlighted a number of colleagues that joined the bank in a set period of time. We'd have gone out with a bespoke questionnaire for them to get
Yeah.
specific data. But one of the things that we're working on at the moment is how do we consistently measure colleague experience, so that as and when you're in a moment, you're a recruiting manager, you've just filled a job, instantly there's a pop-up to ask you for your feedback on what that experience was like, so that the colleague goal and journey teams are getting that continual, always on data that comes through from colleagues. But we equally need to do it in a thoughtful way so that we're not irritating people, because every time they
Yeah,
do something,
it's
we're
that
asking
thing,
for
isn't it? You
feedback.
kind of want to get feedback as often as you can without annoying people.
Yeah.
And getting that balance right isn't always easy, is it?
So we're going to have to learn, and we're going to have to experiment. I mean, experimentation is something that as a bank, we're talking a lot about internally, but definitely something that we're doing as a function to really think about, well, let's have a go within a safe set of boundaries. Let's try it with a small group. Let's see what happens. If that didn't work, what can we learn from it, and how could we do something differently? So definitely take that mindset in.
So one of the, if you were going to call out perhaps one of the areas that you've seen really change as a result of having this much more employee-centered, driven by employee and line manager data and insight, if you were going to call out one of the key moments that matter, or as you call it, the goals and journeys, which would you say has perhaps changed the most as a result of taking this more employee-centered approach?
Well, our pioneer goal was perform. So that has been looking at how we transform, how we do performance management. And that has been really important, connected to the bank's strategy and our focus on customers. So that has seen the biggest shift. We're an organisation that's really considered in terms of how we manage risk. We have a lot of guardrails and processes around how we manage performance. And some of these approaches were really well established over many, many years.
Yeah.
And they've been in place for a long time. So it's been hard to unpick and, question, well, why do we do it like that? So one of the first things that team did was they went out and they got data. So there was over 6,000 colleagues that they talked to from across the bank, over 100,000 data points
Wow.
of colleagues telling them what they loved and what they didn't love about our performance management approach. And that really led to a completely bespoke design based on their feedback, really tailoring it to what colleagues were telling us. What was also different about this approach is, rather than behind sort of closed doors, really working out, right, what are we going to do? What are we going to change? Having it all beautifully mapped out. The team took an agile because that would take years,
That's
as
the
you can
classic one,
imagine.
isn't it? I wouldn't have launched anything unless I'd got it absolutely perfect. Have all my FAQs written, all my scripts for managers, and then you'd go out with it. Whereas you were taking a much more, test and learn type approach.
Well, so what the team actually did was they split it into four chunks. So they focused first of all on goal setting. So actually, the preparation at the end of last year was getting leaders ready for goal setting. And so that has been what we focused on over the first couple of months of this year, making sure there's really, really good dialogue between a manager and a colleague about what are stretching goals. It's not just what your job is, but how do we stretch you? And then what would be great goals for development? And then the next phase was then moving into how do you get into really good quality one-to-one
Yeah.
conversations. So we've kind of sort of bitten off bite-sized chunks as we've gone. And so we've sort of said to leaders, come with us on the journey. We're going to talk to you about goals, and then we'll come back in 3 months and we'll talk to you about this. And it's been amazing how the business have really responded well to, well, you're working with us really quickly. We get that everybody wants to know the so what at the end of the year
Of
about what does
course.
that
Yeah.
actually mean. But that has been a very different way from delivery. So I think that's a really good example of how we've done that in an agile way. It's
Yeah.
also
So more kind of sprints.
yeah, it's also allowed us to look at, for the first part, what's worked, how did leaders respond to the approach we took for training, or,
Yeah.
role modeling? Did that work or not work? And how do we want to adjust things in the next sort of chunk that we did? So,
And what was the feedback and the data that you were getting from those hundreds and hundreds of data points about performance management that needed to change in their view?
So one of the big things we've moved away from is performance ratings. So
Ah,
I definitely think, that old debate that I think lots of organisations are having,
yeah.
that yeah,
And
there would
indeed, many are finally waking up to the fact that it doesn't actually help improve performance or
yeah,
motivate people, does it?
and it was also about the length of time it took to do what's seen as being the admin versus actually the balance being on the good quality conversations.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're doing is we're rebalancing it, sort of much more admin light, much more focus on the good conversations, the development, less on allocating a performance rating.
And I think, you know, asking yourself the question, what's the primary purpose here of our performance management? Is it to improve motivation and performance, or is it to allocate reward? You know, and I think, you know, 99 people out of 100 will say, well, it's about improving performance and motivation, isn't it? So you then kind of gives you that legitimacy to question why are we doing it the way we're doing,
Yeah.
which is all around gearing it towards allocating somebody a number so we can give them their end of year pay increase or bonus. Fascinating. We're running out of time, unfortunately, Katherine, but I just wanted to pick up finally, well, two things really. I want to ask you kind of what's next, but I just wanted to pick up on the point around the digital aspect, because as I understand it, dialing up the digital aspect of the employee experience was part of the ambition, part of your transformation objectives as well. So how have you done that?
We've probably done it in two ways. The first way has been we have a chat bot called Ask Archie, and that chat bot is the entry point for colleagues for any type of query, whether it's a people query, whether it's your desk doesn't work, or
Yeah.
there's something wrong with your technology. So it's that first point
Oh,
of
right. So it's a proper like concierge service, regardless of, and again, blurring those boundaries between HR and the other disciplines.
yeah. So for back office, so we all have something different for our customer facing
Of
staff, but
course.
for all
Yeah.
of those types of queries, yeah, that would be our entry point. So one of the things that we've really done is worked really closely with that team and the goal teams to be making sure that as and when they're transforming and changing, we're keeping Archie up to date and that Archie's got the relevant content.
Yeah.
We focused on trying to answer queries at first point. So wherever possible, if we can get Archie to be able to answer the questions, we will. And one of the things we've been doing is we've been experimenting with generative AI. So we have looked at in a really contained area to do with family friendly policies. How could we get Archie actually to have generative AI built in? And we were able to find that our containment rates went up from 50 something percent to early 70s. Now, the containment
Fantastic.
rates are about you asking a question and how many times that Archie was able to answer. So that is something we're now starting to roll out across a number of small, really defined areas. But that's ultimately improving our colleague experience because a colleague's got a question, they can go in and chat with Archie and they can tell them when and
Yeah.
when. And that's sort
Yeah.
of available 24/7,
Yeah.
because it's always on. So that's definitely an area that we've been looking at how we can experiment with technology. The other area we've done is we've been looking at our technology systems and how can we simplify and maybe strip out some of the complexity that we've put in place because of our policies or our processes or ways of doing something. So might be a bit more of a boring area, but an area that we focused on is our supervisory organisation structure, so the hierarchy
Yeah.
structure. And because of certain rules that we built in, it meant that if you were a manager and you had to make changes to your team structure, it had to go through various levels of approvals before it happened. Well, one of the things we did was we took all of the approvals out. And actually, as a manager, you're now empowered. If you need to change the structure of your team to reflect what's there, you need to create a position that's there, you can go in and you can do it yourself. So it's
Fantastic.
trying to strip out some of that complexity that we've built
And
into our
also
systems.
stripping out some of that HR ownership of things, which we worry that if we let it go, then perhaps there'll be chaos. But actually trusting managers to manage, I think, in my experience, nearly always pays off.
Yes.
Yeah, with support and guidance and coaching and challenge and all of those good things. But starting from a position that actually managers want to do the right thing, I think is very helpful. So what's
Yeah.
next? What's the next part of the journey?
So I still think the next sort of 12 months are going to be focused on embedding. So really building the skills and capabilities and the goal and journey teams. I think there's a lot more we can do with technology. So really looking at what are the really important moments that we offer to colleagues and really making sure that they can access human support. So, unfortunately, sadly, if we have a colleague that dies while they're in employment with us, then actually quickly being able to access through to a human team that can actually help
Yeah,
a manager through that. Whereas in other situations, actually digitizing if we don't actually need a human to be there. So we're really
yeah,
looking at
yeah.
how we evolve our technology architecture as well as continuing to embed the new ways of working.
Katherine, thank you so much for joining me today. It's fascinating to hear what you're doing. And I know that there's tons that we weren't able to cover in this podcast. You'll have to come back. You'll have to come back in a year or so and let us know how it's all going.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, bye for now.
Bye.